Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's talk, One Sherd at a Time, Serrating Ceramics from Paloparado, an important pre-colonial site near the Arizona-Sonora border with Dr. Hunter Claypatch. I'm Maggie Onosorgan, the Public Programs Manager here at the Amerind. And as always, before we begin our program, we would like to acknowledge that the Amerind is located in southern Arizona on lands where the Otham, Hopi, Zuni, Yoemi, and Apache families have lived for untold generations, and whose wisdom and traditions live on today in vibrant communities. We are very grateful for what all of these communities rich in history have to teach us. We would also like to thank our members and donors who make these talks possible and fulfill Amerind's mission to foster and promote the knowledge and understanding of the Native peoples of the Americas through research, education, conservation, and community engagement. To learn how you can assist the Amerind in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit amerind.org. Our next online talk will begin our new day and time. So they'll now be on Thursdays from noon to 1. And our next talk is happening on Thursday, October 30th at 12 p.m. with scholars Linda Morgan and Katrina Soak from the Gila River Community Cultural Resource Management Program. They will be speaking on Otham pottery, prehistoric, historic, and contemporary Native American ceramic production in the Phoenix Basin of southern Arizona. We hope you'll spend your lunch hour learning with us. And now, as always, when our speakers allow, the recording will be sent to all registrants and posted on our YouTube channel for those unable to watch live. A little bit of housekeeping for anyone in the area. We want to remind you that Amerind's 14th annual Autumn Fest will be happening on Saturday, October 25th. This year, we're going to be celebrating the Otham community. In this day-long celebration, we have 2 scholars speaking throughout the day, musicians, we have a Walela, the cruise band will be performing, and lots of artists with their artwork. It's a fun day, food and everything. So that's 10 to 4 on October 25th. So if you want more information about that, it's on our website. Today's recording will be sent to all our registrants and available to watch on our YouTube channel, Amerind Foundation, later this evening. And today, if you have any questions for Dr. Claypatch, please type them in the Q&A chat box and we'll get to as many as possible after his talk. So today we are very pleased to have Dr. Hunter Claypatch with us today. He recently spent a month at Amerind as our resident scholar, and today he'll be speaking about what he was working on and his ongoing research on the archaeological site, Paloparado. It is a very important pre-colonial site near the Arizona-Sonora border. Hunter received his PhD from Binghamton University in 2022. He is also a ceramicist who has worked extensively with pre-colonial pottery on both sides of the borders. He specializes in trincheras tradition of northern Sonora and the pre-colonial inhabitants of present-day Santa Cruz County in Arizona. He currently serves as president-elect for the Arizona Archaeological Council and is a professor at Pima College in Tucson. So we would like to thank him for taking time out of his busy schedule to share his work with us today. So please welcome Dr. Hunter Claypatch.
Thank you. I can share my screen here. Is that sharing here?
Yeah, if you can make it so it's, yeah, there you go.
Okay, it's good. All right.
Yep.
Right. Well, thanks to everyone for attending, and obviously thanks to the Amerind for giving me this opportunity to present to everyone. As Maggie mentioned, my name is Hunter Claypatch. I'm a professor at Pima Community College and specialize in the archaeology of northern Mexico and also the Arizona-Sonora borderlands. My presentation, as Maggie mentioned, is on research that I recently conducted at the Amerind through an emerging scholar residency, and it's titled One Sherd at a Time, Seriating Pottery from Paloparado, an important site near the Arizona-Sonora border. Before I talk, I'd also like to do land acknowledgement myself. I'm speaking from Nogales, Arizona, and the site that I'm actually talking about is located about 20 kilometers north of where I am right now. This area is traditionally served as the homeland for the indigenous O'odham, and despite nationalist-driven borders, has continued to serve as a corridor for people and the movement of ideas really since time immemorial. So just kind of going over the order of my presentation, I've kind of divided it into three main parts. The first part is I'm going to just introduce what Paloparado is and kind of talk about kind of the archaeological legacy that's going on there. The second part, I'm going to talk about some of the research problems and also my own research questions and analysis methods. And then part three, I'm going to introduce the results. And hopefully when that's all done, I'll have some time for some Q&A. So starting part one, situating Paloparado. The site is located on the western terrace of near the Rio Santa Cruz in Santa Cruz County, Arizona. It's located about 22 kilometers north of the international border, roughly 14 miles. The name literally means, Paloparado literally means standing sticks, but it actually takes the name from a local schoolhouse that was there in the 1930s when the site was initially recorded. Aside from a portion of the site, which is falls along Interstate 19, the majority of the site has been on private land and remains on private land. It's been that way for over a century. The map on the right really situates its proximity in relation to other nearby sites. It's certainly not the only site in the area, but it is definitely the best studied pre-colonial site. So some of you are already familiar with Paloparado, but I think it's important to discuss, before I begin, why this site actually matters. Paloparado is the largest and best studied site in the pre-colonial site in extreme southern Arizona. Many of the initial interpretations that derive from the excavation have shaped interpretations of regional prehistory really for decades. Paloparado is also situated between two pre-colonial traditions, the Trincheras tradition to the south and the Hohokam to the north. So its study really provides critical insights into understanding regional interactions and cultural frontiers as well. The site also has a super long occupation spanning about 600 years. So it really provides a wonderful window into understanding local cultural development and how it changed in response to activities that are in neighboring areas as well. The site is also the only formally excavated site in the area within Santa Cruz County with a large classic period component, meaning that it dates from between about 1150 to 1450. There's a few other classic period sites in Nogales, the cemetery ruin being one of them, but they've never actually systematically been excavated. This is the only systematically excavated one. The nearest comparative site that we have from the classic period along the Santa Cruz is actually the Continental site in Green Valley, which is about 40 kilometers north. So quite a bit, quite a bit further north. So this is really important for understanding developments in that respect as well. So while the site was made most famous by Charles Di Peso and the excavations by the Amerind in the 1950s, the site has been known for a long period of time. There's evidence that a local resident was actually collecting artifacts from the site as early as the 1920s, and Sauer and Brand were the first to actually document artifacts from the site during their large-scale survey of southern Arizona and northern Sonora in 1930. At the time, Sauer and Brand really were going off very little knowledge of both the Hohokam, which was then known as the red on buff culture, and the Trincheras tradition. So they used very limited evidence and also surface collections to suggest that the site was occupied during the historic period and pre-colonial period as well. The site was actually formally registered by Ed Danson in 1941 after he visited the site in 1937, and it was given the Arizona City Museum site number AZDD 812. Now, it's important to note that The site number that the Amerind uses for Paloparado is different. That's AZDD81. So the site actually has two site numbers depending on whether you're talking about collections that were derived from Amerind excavations or whether they were from Arizona State Museum. Charles Di Peso started working at the Amerind in 1948 and received permission from T.D. Pendleton, who was owner of the Baca Float Ranch and also the land that the Paloparado site was located on, to conduct excavations. Test excavations were done in early or to mid 1953, with formal excavations taking place from September 1953 to August 1954, with Di Peso hiring local workmen and establishing a lab on the grounds of the site. The photo on the bottom right actually shows workmen in front of a large sherd pile. As I'm going to talk about, the vast majority of planeware from the site was actually recorded in the field, but never actually collected and curated. So that's something important that I'll touch on a little bit later. In total, Di Peso recorded 90 houses from the site, pit houses from the site, 186 inhumations, numerous cremations as well. Ceramic counts total over 210,000 sherds from the site and over 600 reconstructible vessels. While Charles Di Peso is probably best known for his later work at the site of Paquimé in the Casas Grandes region in Chihuahua, this was his largest excavation prior to that time period, and he used his excavation knowledge from the site of Paloparado to kind of enhance his understanding and kind of perfect his skills that he later applied to the site of Paquimé. The materials from the site, including all photographs, drawings, and field notes, were curated at the Amerind Museum in Dragoon, Arizona, where they still are today. This map of the site really kind of is actually a fold out from the 1956 publication on the site, and really kind of illustrates the expansive area that Di Peso was working in. The area that he was working in spans about 300 meters by 200 meters. And what's interesting is that you'll see that some of the features are highlighted in red and some are in black. This was Di Peso's way of designating whether he believed features were earlier or later. Basically, he thought the earlier houses and structures were in red, and we'll talk about kind of those initial interpretations in just a second here. So Di Peso had many interpretations from the site, but the ones that I think are kind of most important to talk about are his thoughts on chronology. Di Peso really interpreted Paloparado as an indigenous O'odham settlement with a primary occupation happening in the 17th and 18th century. He used early mission accounts to really kind of equate the site to the historic site of San Cayetano, and interpreted some of the later houses actually as being dwellings for famous missionaries, including Padre Quino. The image on the bottom, actually the original note on the back of it, highlights that he thinks that this was a structure where Padre Quino actually probably slept. So a lot of this interpretation really kind of framed his thinking about the site. He thought that the site was abandoned following 1751 Pima revolt because there was evidence of kind of massive catastrophic fires in some of the houses as well. Prior to this historic settlement, Di Peso argued that there was an earlier Hohokam component that he thought was represented by an intrusion to the area that occurred around 900 and lasted a few hundred years before local O'odham populations reasserted themselves. It's important to note that Di Peso's interpretation at the time of Hohokam chronology differed significantly from what Amo Howry had positioned for the Hohokam from the excavations at Snaketown. If you're familiar with the original Snaketown report, Howry really thought that the Hohokam phases were roughly 200-year spans, which kind of went back in time to around 200 BC. Di Peso interpreted a much more condensed chronology, which, the bulk of the Hohokam culture lasting from about 900 to 1250. This is a time period before the active use or frequent use of radiocarbon dating. And as it turns out, both of them were a little bit off, but it kind of stands in as kind of a contrast to what a lot of other thinkers were believed at the time. So while Di Peso's work at Paloparado really kind of set the stage for knowledge of the site, there were a couple other projects that took place later on. The first was an excavation in the 1960s on a lower terrace by Brown and Grebinger. And they actually used a lot of the same interpretations that Di Peso had, but kind of provided some interesting feedback as well regarding some of the ceramics as well. The second is a work by Swicka in the 1990s, much more recently. By this time, considerably more work had been done in the region, and there was kind of a lot of kind of changing ideas as to what people thought actually Paloparado was dating to, and so there were a lot of kind of contrasting ideas with Di Peso's initial interpretations that I'm going to touch on here. On top of increased work at Paloparado, the growth of CRM archaeology really meant that many more sites have been documented along the middle and upper Santa Cruz. I put up a few important volumes on the right, one being from the site of El Macayo and the other being Aldea Inesperada. And these reports have really emphasized that the area served as a contact zone or frontier between Trincheras and Hohokam populations, but also had a kind of a regional form of cultural expression that kind of was unique in the area and was kind of exemplified by local pottery productions and kind of unique funerary customs as well. On top of work in the area, increased work in the Tucson Basin and in northern Sonora has also aided in refined chronologies and ceramic seriations that have then been subsequently applied to enhance understanding of the archaeology of the middle upper Santa Cruz. So immediately following Paloparado's excavations or Di Peso's excavations at Paloparado, there was actually a push to have the site transferred to the National Park Service. This actually never happened, and unfortunately, its location on private land has meant that a lot of it has been kind of sold off and subject to increased development and the growth of Rio Rico in particular. The main terrace of the site, however, is largely intact and definitely still has clear evidence for intact deposits. So moving on to part two, research problems, questions, and my own analysis methods. It's now widely known that Di Peso's chronology from Paloparado was incorrect. While Di Peso mentioned radiocarbon dates actually being submitted to Arizona State Museum from the site, there's actually no evidence that they were ever processed. In 1987, David Wilcox published a revised chronology using growing knowledge of kind of the region. Di Peso, as I mentioned, thought that the site was abandoned following a Pima revolt in 1751. And aside from a very few number of historic artifacts, Wilcox argued that there was really no evidence of a substantial occupation after about 1350. He equated the Upper Pima occupation, what Di Peso called the Upper Pima occupation, to the Hohokam Classic period, which was between about 1150 to 1450. So the chronology of Di Peso's, or the idea of Di Peso's abandonment, was correct, but he was probably about 400 years off in terms of when he actually thought that was taking place. Di Peso also interpreted the earlier Hohokam occupation as kind of a uniform intrusion, which could be kind of consolidated into a single migratory event. It's now clear that the evidence from Paloparado indicates that there were several centuries of kind of sustained cultural interaction that was going on. So the sense of kind of a much longer and deeper chronology with the Hohokam is something that Wilcox also stressed. Importantly, while Wilcox's chronology is something that most subscribe to now, including myself, his research was primarily archival in nature and a lot wasn't done with the artifacts themselves. There's been, in fact, virtually no systematic attempt to study the artifacts since Di Peso's time in order to better understand how they correspond with our growing understanding of the region. And while Wilcox's study is super valuable, it itself is now nearly 40 years old, and we've learned have a much more nuanced understanding of the archaeology of the region, and also ceramic chronologies and things like that. With issues regarding ceramics, during excavations at Paloparado, knowledge of Sonoran Desert ceramics were extremely limited. Hodges Ruin was the type site for the Tucson Basin Hohokam, but at the time that Di Peso excavated Paloparado, a formal report hadn't yet actually been published. Knowledge of Trincheras tradition pottery was virtually non-existent, and nor was really any clear knowledge of what was going on with local manufactured pottery as well. Di Peso used type names as well that are kind of now obsolete, including Pantano Red on Brown, and created others like Ramanote Red on Brown and Nogales Purple on Red to kind of make sense of the assemblage he was working with. None of the types that he created were well defined in the Paloparado report, and they haven't been used by subsequent scholars. Despite having limited knowledge, Di Peso also typed nearly every sherd to a specific type. In fact, 99.9% of the sherds he classified as a specific type. Well, this was fairly common in the 1950s. This is not the case today. Pottery today, ceramicists often recognize that many sherds lack specific diagnostic attributes and may be assignable to one or more types, such as Rito or early Rincon Red on Brown, or more broadly attributable only to the tradition, such as indeterminate Tucson Basin Red on Brown. The image on the bottom actually shows pottery that he all assigned to Rito Red on Brown. While some of those sherds may have diagnostic attributes, I'm kind of skeptical myself, but while they may have some diagnostic attributes there, most of them do not. Plus, I also kind of put a red circle around the top left one. That's actually a Trincheras tradition sherd. So he classified a sherd that's associated with a different tradition, in as being a Tucson Basin type, and specifically as Rito Red on Brown. So this really kind of highlights the challenges of taking Di Peso's initial classifications at face value. And means that much of Di Peso's initial classifications really, like I said, they can't be they're unreliable under today's standards. Also important is that Di Peso only recorded sherd counts and not sherd weights or sherd sizes. This means that large vessel fragments were basically treated the exact same as fingernail size sherds in kind of overall ceramic tallies. As understanding formation processes is certainly important, especially when we're talking about a site that was occupied as long as Paloparado, examining sherd size is really critical for understanding the extent of temporal mixing, or with kind of establishing what the primary occupation of a feature actually was. So earlier this year, I applied for a 1-month emerging scholar residency at the Amerind with the goal of working with the Paloparado collection. I had previously spent a little bit of time with the Paloparado collection and knew that a reanalysis had a lot of potential. My research proposal was really centered on kind of trying to answer 3 questions. The first one, how might modern analysis practices and understanding of ceramic chronologies refine or challenge earlier ideas by Di Peso or Wilcox? The second was, do any features from the site have unmixed ceramic deposits, and what might these tell us about change at the site and more broadly along the middle upper Santa Cruz? And finally, what can locally produced ceramics tell us about communities of practice at the site and more broadly the region? I'm going to focus my discussion primarily on the first 2 questions because the third question is kind of part of larger ongoing research, and there's still some important work that really kind of needs to be done as well, but I will talk about that for sure at the end. So I did receive the residency, and that's why I'm talking to you today. But I did want to touch on some of my own background research and what kind of made me a good fit for answering these questions. I worked as an archaeologist in the Southwest before applying to graduate school, and was really kind of troubled by the relatively little information that U.S. archaeologists had about northern Mexico archaeology or borderland archaeology as well. And I went to Binghamton University starting in 2016 under the guidance of Randall McGuire with the specific goal of working in Sonora, Mexico, and on Trincheras tradition pottery in particular. And I'm very proud to say that that's exactly what I ended up doing. Through multiple NSF and National Geographic grants, I had the opportunity to be part of excavations in Sonora and also formed strong partnerships with many Mexican and borderlands colleagues, including Elisa Villalpando of Sonora, who has really continued to serve as a mentor for me. My master's thesis was a synthesis of indigenous ceramics from the state of Sonora, and my dissertation provided the first ever seriation of Trincheras tradition pottery, which also included looking at some Trincheras pottery from the site of Paloparado. So that was my prior experience working a little bit with the Paloparado collection. Since finishing my dissertation, I've also worked with places like Desert Archaeology on ceramic assemblages from the Tucson Basin and Phoenix Basin, and have relocated to Nogales, Arizona, where I've worked with legacy collections to really better understand the Middle Upper Santa Cruz and its relationship kind of as a frontier contact zone between the Hohokam and the Trincheras. While I still very much consider myself a learning ceramicist and an apprentice, my knowledge on ceramics from both sides of the border really makes me unique among ceramicists today, and I think allows for a nuanced understanding of an assemblage which is fairly complicated, like Paloparado. While a 1 month stay at the Amerind was a long time to get a considerable amount of work done, I knew it was too little time to analyze all of the pottery from the site. I focused my analysis on decorated sherds recovered from the site's 90 pit houses. I thought pit houses were a really useful unit of measurement because it provided a window into daily site activities. I also, decorated sherds also provide a really important window into chronology and change through time as well. So prioritizing decorated ceramics was very important. Fortunately, all curated sherds had been meticulously labeled after the excavation with the house number and as well as whether they came from feature or from floor or fill context. The example on the top right kind of shows that an example from house 80 floor context. While the labeling of each sherd was super helpful, the sherds were not arranged by houses or excavation units. In fact, they were actually arranged by the ceramic types that Di Peso initially classified them as. I previously mentioned that there's some issues with Di Peso's initial classification, and all of the analyzed pottery was spread across over 120 boxes, like the one that you see on the bottom. And what this meant was that I really didn't actually have a strong understanding of all the pottery that I was looking at or going to be seeing from a given pit house until the entire analysis was largely complete. Di Peso did have published numbers from each of the houses in the 1956 volume, but they ended up proving to be fairly unreliable. Unlike Di Peso's initial analysis, I organized all sherds by size, class, and weight, and also recorded conjoining and matching sherds as a single data set. This really allowed me to use sherd size as a proxy for reconstructing primary occupation, and also meant that my data wasn't going to be improperly skewed by multiple conjoining sherds from a single vessel. I used current ceramic typologies and numerous publications for identification. This included work by Wallace in the Tucson Basin, Abbott and Wallace in the Phoenix Basin, myself in northern Sonora, and Heckman and Whittlesey for southeastern Arizona. Several of these authors also established important graphical guides, which aid ceramicists in classification as well. All of the data I collected was aggregated and could easily be searchable by feature, sherd type, sherd size, etc. To conduct the initial seriation, I actually used printed forms, such as the one that I illustrated there, to tally the frequency of sherds from each feature according to general Hohokam phases, such as early colonial or late colonial. I also established a criteria for the extent of temporal mixing that would be allowable for each house. Paloparado was occupied for a long period of time, like I said, around 600 years. So some temporal mixing was going to be expected. And I ended up kind of using this based on the frequency of sherds, the overall frequency of sherds in a given house, if diagnostic pottery was temporally overlapping, the sherd size of non-temporally overlapping sherds, and whether or not they came from floor or fill contexts. So on to my analysis results. I should note that although ceramics provide a super important window into reconstructing pit house usage and site usage through time, it's certainly not the only method. Part of my work also involved reviewing original drawings from the houses and also looking at other artifacts, forms of material culture such as projectile points to see if they supported the ceramics as well. I also looked at several planeware vessels and fragments that I'll talk about here in a little bit. So in total, I analyzed 4,728 decorated sherds, which is believed to be all known decorated pottery from Di Peso's pit house excavations. By looking at ceramic tradition, frequency really doesn't differ greatly. What I'm seeing in the frequency by tradition doesn't differ greatly from Di Peso's initial report. Tucson Basin pottery is by far the most common, but there's also some important differences. First, Di Peso used Ramanote red on brown for locally produced decorated pottery. This type is no longer used. However, ceramicists, including myself, do recognize locally produced ceramics and classify them as upper or middle Santa Cruz. And upper and middle Santa Cruz pottery as a tradition doesn't neatly overlap with what Di Peso was actually calling Ramanote red on brown. So that's an important distinction. Also, Di Peso seems to have classified buffware from the Phoenix Basin far more frequently than I actually was able to observe it. This is almost certainly because knowledge of Tucson Basin pottery and kind of its overall, perimeters were still fairly limited. And I think there was a tendency to overtype sherds as buffware because it was slightly more familiar at the time. With that said, there's still a large frequency of buffware that is at the site. It's also important to note that most sherds from the site were quite small. About 80% of the sherds are smaller than 16 centimeters squared, and over a quarter of them are smaller than 5 centimeters squared. This meant that a lot of pottery that I was looking at lacked key diagnostic attributes which could be allowable for assigning to a specific type. The largest sherds, however, were typically from the classic period, specifically Tinca Verde red on brown, which makes sense because they would have been subject to less reoccupations and or formation processes, which would continue breaking them down during subsequent reoccupations. If we look at sherds by phase, we see that there's a high frequency of pottery during the late colonial to early sedentary period, so between about 850 to 1000, and again during the classic period from about 1150 to 1350. These spurts really coincide with kind of the initial growth of the site and later occupation kind of and remodeling that's going on during the classic period. A lot of new houses are used and built during the classic period. There is still, however, a lot of pottery that's dating from the middle to kind of late sedentary period. So the site was by no means abandoned during that time period. And I think it's also important to note that there are some typological challenges with assigning pottery to kind of middle, late sedentary, to the middle, late sedentary period, especially when we're talking about fairly small sherds. So I think that probably, they're a bit underrepresented in the overall ceramic counts. There's also clearly sherds that predate 850, so kind of early colonial and even pioneer period contexts from one house in particular that I'm going to touch on. So the site was, by no means, unoccupied prior to, the late colonial period. You'll also see that there's virtually no historic period pottery. Some of the pottery that Di Peso classified as historic seems to have been incorrect or was incorrect. And the small amount that seems to actually be historic autumn pottery is clearly not representative of the site's main occupation. On the pit house level, not surprisingly, many houses do show evidence of considerable mixing. About 1/3 of the houses actually also have fairly few sherds, which really doesn't allow for them to be temporally placed either. I determined that 16 of the houses show fairly little evidence of temporal mixing or no temporal mixing at all. 10 of these are from the classic period, or what Di Peso initially called Upper Pima, and 6 of them are pre-classic houses, which previously were called Hohokam. I'm going to talk about the 10 classic period houses kind of cumulatively, and then highlight 3 of the most interesting pre-classic houses kind of individually. So Paloparado, as I've mentioned, is super important for reconstructing the classic period during the Middle Upper Santa Cruz because it's really the only site from this time period to be systematically excavated. So the results from what we're finding from the classic period houses are therefore really important. From the 10 houses, 573 sherds and or reconstructible vessels were analyzed. Almost all of these houses, importantly, were found in the northeastern portion of the site, which was an area that was basically unoccupied prior to the classic period. So it was a new area that seems to have been utilized during the classic period, and that's why there's not very much mixing that's going on with these ceramic assemblages. The bottom right has a breakdown of all pottery kind of from those houses, even though it's a little bit difficult to see. Wilcox had previously suggested that the catastrophic burning that Di Peso initially assigned to about 1751 was probably took place about 1300 or 1350. This is supported by the presence of pottery like Santa Cruz polychrome and Gila polychrome in houses where the burning was actually found. Some houses from the classic period lack burning and also lack polychromes as well. And it's possible that these maybe date a little bit earlier in the classic period, so maybe late 1100s, early 1200s, but that's a little bit difficult to tease out. What's important is that there's virtually no Trincheras tradition or Phoenix Basin pottery in these unmixed classic period houses. Previous research has suggested that kind of changing trade networks during the classic period impacted the presence of this pottery in areas like Tucson, and that seems to certainly be the case as well for the upper middle Santa Cruz. Tinga Verde red on brown was by far the most common type, and there's also a high frequency of white slip Tinga Verde red on brown. 20% of the pottery, interestingly, also reflects local decorated pottery, with a good amount of those actually possessing Tinga Verde-like motifs. This is really cool because previous research not only has demonstrated that there's local pottery production going on in the area, but that there's a frequent kind of replication or kind of copying of Tucson Basin-like motifs. But this has primarily only been documented in Rito or Rincon phase context. So it's really cool to see examples from the classic period where they're actually utilizing Tinga Verde-like motifs, and really kind of shows the adaptability and flexibility of local potter communities and kind of their responses to kind of trade and interaction a little bit further north. In terms of the pre-classic houses, House 47 is the first of the 3 I'm going to touch on. In total, there were 55 sherds which were recovered, or I was able to analyze from this house, which virtually all suggest a Rito phase occupation, so between about 850 to 950. The only sherd actually that doesn't really kind of overlap with this is a 3-gram late Snaketown sherd, so easily entered the house through formation processes and other means. It's a very small example. There's a high presence of not only Tucson Basin pottery, but Phoenix Basin and Trincheras tradition pottery as well, and really demonstrates during this time period there was considerable regional interaction that was going on at the site of Paloparado. There's also, which is really cool and special to me as a Trincheras tradition scholar, is a high frequency of Nogales polychrome, which you see on the bottom right. In fact, over 20% of the pottery by weight from House 47 is actually Nogales polychrome, which reinforces earlier studies by myself that this was one of the earliest polychromes produced in the Southwest United States and Northwest Mexico. 850 to 950, if you're not familiar, is much earlier than polychromes were typically produced in the Southwest. It's not usually for another couple hundred years that they start making their presence more widely seen. The bottom right shows a really nice bowl fragment of Nogales polychrome, as well as a very nice worked sherd as well. House 30 is the second pre-classic house worth mentioning. Di Peso actually initially classified this as a Hohokam ceremonial house based on its size and construction. It is a large house, but it's somewhat difficult to critically evaluate, Di Peso's initial idea. 321 decorated sherds were analyzed from this one house, so there's a lot of pottery and there's a lot that we can say about the assemblage. Given the high frequency, there is a small bit of mixing that we get from later contexts. A lot of this seems to have been the result of a classic period inhumation, which was placed over the top of this house. So that created some mixing of the pottery, I'm sure. But with that said, about 95% of the pottery spans from the Rito to early Rincon phase, and a bit more if we kind of stretch that to the middle Rincon. So again, from about 850 to 1000, or like 850 to 1050. If this was a special or ceremonial house, such as what Di Peso kind of initially thought, it's possible that it had a longer occupation, and that might be why we're seeing kind of pottery which seems to stretch a longer span of time. The pottery from House 30, as with House 47, shows extensive regional interaction. Over a third of the decorated pottery from this house is Phoenix Basin buffware. Almost all of it that's able to be classified is Santa Cruz red on buff. Over 20% of the sherds are also from the Trincheras heartland. This includes a really high quantity, again, of Nogales polychrome sherds. On the bottom left are examples that are all from floor contexts from this house. And based on the designs, kind of the rim forms and whatnot, they're clearly representative of multiple vessels, which is really cool. This house also has the only example of black and white pottery from house contexts at Paloparado, which is kind of shown on the bottom right. Di Peso initially classified this as reserve black and white, which is clearly not the case. I'm not a scholar of ancestral Puebloan ceramics, but it's certainly not that. I did speak with a few other scholars, and San Marcial black on white from the Rio Grande seems to possibly work, based on the time range and the designs. But I'd be interested in hearing what others have to say about that. I do have an image of the temper profile that I could send people as well. What I think is really cool is, and I put the black and white and the Nogales polychrome together. That was all found in floor context, and to my knowledge, actually having examples of Nogales polychrome in a floor context with black and white ancestral Puebloan pottery is something that is unique. So I think House 30 at Paloparado is kind of unique in that combination. Again, you can let me know if I'm off there, but I suspect I'm not. The last house that I'm going to talk about is House 80, which for me is also the most interesting. This house is located in Area F of the site and is actually one of the smallest houses in the whole site. On the right, you'll see that kind of from the drawings that the house was remodeled, with the entry actually moving from the south to the north. The top right drawing was actually done in the field by Barton Wright, and the bottom right is a digital reconstruction that I made, kind of also incorporating some of the key artifacts in floor context. What makes this House 80 to me so interesting is not only that it's primarily colonial period, so by pre-950 or so, but that many of the sherds can be assigned to the early colonial period. This includes several examples of Cañada de Oro red on brown and Gila Butte red on buff, which suggests an initial occupation in the late 700s or very early 800s. The frequency of later sherds like Rito red on brown and Santa Cruz red on buff suggests that the house may have been remodeled sometimes, after 850, but it was probably under continuous occupation during that whole time, because you get kind of the earlier colonial and later colonial pottery kind of found in association together. I listed the 6 largest sherds by weight because I think they all kind of reinforce an early occupation. This includes a large fragment of Gila Butte red on buff and an early kind of unusual broadline sherd that I'm going to show in the next slide. So at the bottom left, you'll see examples of Gila Butte red on buff, Cañada del Oro, and an early Trinchera sherd kind of there, which I'm quite confident is transitional between La Playa purple on brown and San Martin purple on brown. So probably in the late 700s or very, very early 800s. I wouldn't say that sherd could be any later than that. The top examples are examples kind of from the remodeling occupation, or what seems to be the remodeled occupation with Rito red on brown. One of those is actually from a nice floor context. The sherd in the bottom right is Gila Butte red on buff. I don't think it's diagnostic to either early or late Gila Butte, but you're welcome to let me know. It's missing the rim itself. But it seems to be very close based on the trailing lines. The sherd in the middle bottom was actually initially classified by Di Peso as Estrella red on gray, which would be an early Phoenix Basin type. I don't think that it's from the Phoenix Basin, so I don't think it's Estrella red on gray, but the designs do look early, right? And they kind of fall within that kind of broadline trend and have classified it as broadline red on brown, but I'd be interested in hearing others' thoughts on that sherd as well, because that type of pottery is pretty unusual down this far south. Unlike House 47 or House 30, there's also no examples of Nogales polychrome from this site, which provides really another line of evidence for kind of the temporal placement of this type, or at least when it kind of started, entering the southern Arizona, which probably wasn't until kind of the mid to later end of the 800s. So for me, what makes House 80 so special is that it really contributes to larger discussions of what's going on in the middle and upper Santa Cruz prior to about 850 CE. Previous proposals in the region kind of suggest that the area was sparsely inhabited, and that migrating Trincheras and Hohokam populations dramatically altered the landscape around 850. Much of our understanding, however, has been limited by an absence of reliable radiocarbon dates and very little evidence of early decorated pottery. Leaving out Paloparado, the table on the bottom actually shows a list of all known intrusive pottery, which is found along the middle in upper Santa Cruz, basically from Nogales up to Macacuri. It's not many examples, right? So very, very few examples if you leave out Paloparado. The evidence from House 80 really demonstrates that the region was, or at least the area of Paloparado, was already being influenced by the Trincheras and Hohokam prior to 850. It's important to note, too, that Paloparado also yielded 2 reconstructible Cañada del Oro vessels from cremation contexts, and really demonstrates that House 80 wasn't an isolated occurrence, and there was a lot of early activities going on at the site. Kind of one of the last things I'm going to touch on is the planeware studies that I'm doing. Part of my ongoing research is with other colleagues, including Zitlali Vega and Jasmine Santiago Soto, doing a detailed study of planeware across the Arizona-Sonora borderlands. This research is based on communities of practice or practice theory, basically how knowledge of ceramic production is learned and transmitted. And I was really interested in using my time at the Amerind to study the planeware from Paloparado to see how it could contribute to this larger discussion. As many of you know, however, planeware, although it makes up the vast majority of pottery from pre-colonial sites in the Southwest United States and Northwest Mexico, it's seldom given attention. It's usually just kind of tallied, and that's about it. And Di Peso himself, of course, didn't collect much of the planeware from the site, as I've already mentioned. And this is particularly unfortunate because the middle and upper Santa Cruz is not only the confluence for traditions like the Trincheras tradition and the Hohokam, but it's the confluence of 2 primary manufacturing techniques. In the Trincheras heartland, pottery was primarily produced using the coil and scrape technique, whereas further north, the pottery was produced using the paddle and anvil technique. And these construction techniques leave signatures on the finished vessel. So understanding local pottery production really sheds important insights into local ideologies and cultural transmission. Previous work on local planeware with my colleagues from over 20 sites really demonstrates that construction techniques vary in frequency over time and seems directly proportional to cultural interactions from both regions. While paddle and anvil pottery was the most dominant manufacturing technique, it became increasingly frequent by the start of the Classic period. This is also reflected in a continuation of local decorated ceramics with Tenca Verde-like motifs, which I've kind of touched on, and also an absence of trincheras material culture that we're finding at sites later on in time. So the Paloparado planeware, as I've mentioned, right, is somewhat difficult to evaluate because it's a somewhat small and biased sample of what was initially there. Nonetheless, we can observe some important trends. First, using Classic period houses with little temporal mixing, we see that paddle and anvil manufacturing is pervasive. There's no other evidence of other construction techniques that I've observed on Classic period houses from unmixed contexts. So that's really interesting. Also, evidence for trincheras or Gila plain pottery, which would be intrusive, is super low and almost certainly the result of mixing that happened. They're very small sherds and almost certainly the result of mixing. Instead, we do find a low frequency of planewares, which look to be from areas such as the Papagoria, which makes sense considering changing trade networks in the time, and also the rise in the frequency of things like Sells Red, which was first defined by Scatling in the Papagoria and Jackrabbit Ruin. So the other pre-classic houses really kind of followed general trends that I previously observed at other sites. But House 80, again, is super interesting as well. Unfortunately, only 13% of the planeware from this house was actually curated at the Amerind. Local pottery, however, shows a variety of production techniques, including coil and scrape, paddle and anvil, hybrid, and also hand-built manufacture. Also, there's a high frequency of intrusive planeware from further north and trincheras pottery, and a somewhat unusual schist-tempered source, which seems to closely align with pottery that I've also seen near Arivaca, so about 25 kilometers to the west. Di Peso also initially classified a high frequency of pottery from this site as Vaki plain, which is an early planeware from the Phoenix Basin produced in the 6th and 7th century. I don't think that this initial classification is correct, but I actually don't know the best way to classify this at this moment. It's unusual, it is very thin, and it does have some very fine micaceous inclusions. I'm quite confident it's non-local, but I'm not leaving out the possibility that it's an early temper source that was not exploited later on. What is significant is that this pottery, whether it's Vaki plain or something else, House 80 is really the only house where it's found with any frequency, which reinforces that it's an early type. So whatever it is, it's early, and that's cool in its own right. As with decorated ceramics, planeware from House 80 clearly demonstrates that there's a lot of complex social interactions and trade networks going on in the late 7 and early 800s, and that the early inhabitants clearly didn't subscribe to kind of a uniform or monolithic identity, which is super cool for me. In terms of ongoing research, this involves working with Carrie Schleher of the University of New Mexico on a small petrographic study of locally produced sherds from the site. This is really with the goal of kind of understanding clay sourcing and also possible changing temper sources, and see if there's a correlation between changing construction techniques and really how this might shed light on communities of practice in the region. For this, I only selected sherds from features with no temporal mixing or very limited temporal mixing. This includes some of those classic period houses that I talked about, as well as pottery from House 30 and, of course, House 80. Even though it's a small study, this is actually only the second petrographic study ever done in the Middle Upper Santa Cruz. So it's hopefully kind of working towards building a larger understanding of clay in the region. So what did we learn as a kind of wrap up? I'd like to highlight a couple things. First, we learned that Di Peso's initial chronology was obviously off, and that the ceramic evidence clearly suggests an occupation primarily between about 700 to 1300. We learned that the site abandonment in the 1300s left us with several classic period houses with intact floor deposits. While David Wilcox and others have kind of previously kind of said this or suggested this, a detailed study of classic period pottery really sheds important insights into kind of understanding what was going on in the region during that time. Information also demonstrates kind of the local production of decorated pottery, much of which closely mirrors the aesthetics of Tinca Verde Red and Brown. So that's really cool as well. I'm currently working on a paper which talks about these houses and really their value in reconstructing regional ceramic trends during the classic period. Well, I went into the project expecting to find some classic period houses with limited mixing. I was really excited to see evidence for pre-classic houses. And these pre-classic houses really demonstrate considerable regional interaction, particularly during the 9th and 10th century. House 80 is obviously very cool because it's early and helps to fill in a very poorly understood regional history. I'm planning on using data from House 80 and kind of more broadly the site as a whole for a manuscript on early ceramics from the middle and upper Santa Cruz and really trying to tease out what that says about migrating populations into the area and or pre-existing indigenous populations and how they kind of responded to these changes. The planeware evidence is somewhat difficult to interpret because less of the initial excavation material was maybe there than I'd hoped. But with that said, it still supports general planeware trends that I've been observing at other sites. Finally, I think this work really highlights the tremendous value of legacy collections for advancing archaeological knowledge. I think we can all recognize that we were living in an era with increased financial uncertainty, and archaeology, increased financial insecurity with archaeology as a whole. And I think it's important to remember that legacy collections still hold important clues that old excavations are always subject to revised interpretations. And this kind of reanalysis of legacy collections takes time, but doesn't necessarily take that much money, right? And I think that this is a really kind of important case study for that as well. With that said, I'd like to thank Amerind, especially Eric and Maria, for kind of granting this award and kind of working with me during the time I was at the Amerind to kind of make all this research possible. And I'd like to open it up to any Q&A. If you don't want to, ask a question here, I've also got my email as well that you can write. So thank you.
Thanks, Hunter. Let me get to some of the questions that you do have. One from William. Can you please show us some of your pottery? Explain how fired, and also talk a bit about the traditions that most strongly influence your work of pottery. Oh, and what clays and paints do you use? Thank you.
In my own works?
Yeah, it sounds like.
I certainly have worked with pottery and I do not consider myself to be anything that great in any capacity. But I certainly think as a ceramicist, having a good understanding of working with clay is kind of fundamental for understanding things. But I don't have a strong response for that.
Okay. One from Rod. Where did the designs come from? Were they locally created, influences of other cultures, commonalities across time periods?
Yeah, so a lot of the designs, especially with the locally produced stuff, right, at Paloparado, the most dominant designs are coming from the Tucson Basin area. So Tucson area, further south, there are some kind of incorporations of designs from elsewhere, but the most dominant aesthetic in the area seems to be Tucson Basin-like designs. And is my screen shared right now?
Yeah, let me
see if I can. So I can go back to some of these. So like these are, this is from the Tucson Basin, right? This is a very kind of characteristic design, an early design, but with kind of trailing lines that you see on the exterior. This is a bowl fragment, trailing lines on the vessel exterior with kind of those kind of swirls and kind of key motif that's really characteristic of Tucson Basin pottery, and it does get replicated further south in Paloparado as well.
So are there any theories about what those trailing lines signify?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I mean, and I think I have a couple of different interpretations. I mean, I think that we're kind of working. I'm still kind of working, teasing out what all that means. I mean, I think that what we're seeing is that even though there's a lot of cultural influences that are happening, at Paloparado and in the area, it seems that ideologically, it seems like probably whether it be family, kin, whether it be marriage alliances, the stronger connections are in the Tucson Basin. And while other things are kind of trickling in, it seems to be kind of the more dominant culture and kind of the more dominant practice that's going on at that time.
Let me get to some of the other ones. Did you locate a kiln site from Joseph?
No, no. I mean, Di Peso, not at this site, there's not, he had a couple of interpretations of some different areas, but nothing that's like really clearly a ceramic firing area. It does seem that the pottery that's being locally produced is being produced at a fairly small scale, probably at a household level. So it's nothing that's like super major, that there's like craft specialization that's going on down there, like you might see further north in Phoenix or an area like that.
One from our friend James. Hello, Dr. Claypatch. 2 questions. Does your name have anything to do with your interest in clay? And how often do you find enough sherds to completely rebuild a vessel?
Yeah, it wasn't until I started grad school that I kind of thought about my name, and no, it doesn't. It doesn't have any connection. It's coincidental entirely. I would say that it's very rare, and I'm sure other ceramicists would agree with me. It's very rare to find enough fragments, to reconstruct everything. A lot of that is because excavations seldom, we seldom excavate an entire site, right? And so some of the fragments, are still in the ground. Other times we just don't know, right? What goes on with it. But yeah, I mean, there's only only a kind of a small amount of reconstructible vessels even that I was working at in this collection. So pretty rare.
And one from Joseph. Was any content residue discerned?
No, unfortunately, a lot of the kind of early cleaning techniques seem to have been pretty destructive with that. Like residue analysis is something that people are a lot more mindful of nowadays than they would have been in the 1950s. And I didn't observe. I mean, it is possible to find sherds that look like they could have be subject to residue analysis, but I didn't see in my work anything in my analysis anything that really stood out. But it's a great question.
Yeah. What do you mean by legacy collection?
I mean, collections that have been housed in institutions in curation facilities for a long period of time, right? So when excavated material comes out of the ground, there are these collections that have been there, and I mean they're always subject to reanalysis, but they're being housed for long term for posterity's sake, and so so the Paloparado collection is a legacy collection for sure.
One from Guinevere. I'm curious that Di Peso placed the site so late. Any additional thoughts or comments on that initial chronology?
Yeah, I think that he was originally, I mean, he seems to have been really interested early on, and kind of through a lot of his work in trying to make the prehistoric to historic connection. And I do think, in my own personal opinion, that a lot of his kind of ideas were a little biased by trying to find that connection, which is still in this area proven to be somewhat difficult to find. There is some evidence for historic occupation. I mean, if you visit the site now, you will see historic period pottery. And so I think, especially when he's working in an area where there was virtually, he's working with no prior knowledge, right? And kind of a little bit of kind of, idea of what he thinks he's seeing. I think that framed, I think that really framed his thinking.
And one from Ian, are sherds the result of accidental damage, or did the pots have a limited life, like Roman?
It's certainly both. I mean, and I mean, even if a vessel is completely intact, when it's left and abandoned, it doesn't mean it's not going to break. Sometimes you can see evidence for if somebody just drops a vessel, right, and it just kind of shatters and goes. So, I mean, there's as many ways, just like how our plates and dishes can break, today. There's as many ways that could happen in the past as it does today.
And he had a second part. Why did the sherds end up on the house floors?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, a lot of, especially with the later houses that seem to have undergone like a catastrophic event. It seems like basically a lot of things were left in place when those houses were being abandoned. Other times, if somebody's living in an area, decides to kind of move out for whatever reason, it's it's not being cleaned out as perfectly as all that. And if there's already kind of broken pottery fragments in the corner, they're not going to worry about taking it, but they might take the complete vessel, right? And that's why you're kind of less likely to see complete vessels, because they're longer, they're more likely to be used until they actually break. But yeah.
So one from Sharon, Membris influence does not seem to be present here.
I would say, I mean, that's a good question. That's a really good question. I mean, so the where you find kind of the Membres expression the most, there is one sherd from one of the houses that is definitely like a Membres black and white. But with the San Simon tradition seems to be kind of a local kind of expression of that in southeastern Arizona. But I would say less so. I would say kind of more kind of Hohokam-like aesthetics are more common, and then kind of some of the trincheras tradition technologies and things. But yeah, Mimid is not so much.
So is there an idea of what these pots were used for? Are they ceremonial, or is there
Yeah, and
idea?
they seem to have been used for a variety of different purposes. I mean, some of them have intensive evidence of fire exposure. So some of them were, even though they were decorated and very pretty, some of them were used for cooking, for kind of making things. Others, very kind of smaller bowls, kind of more presentation pieces, or for eating from. But yeah, I mean, they were used for a variety of purposes. Oftentimes, bowls, in just kind of in a very general level, bowls are less likely to kind of show evidence of fire exposure, especially like when you're talking about the really, really nice ones like Nogales polychrome. Those are less likely to have evidence of fire exposure than others. But jars often are, or sometimes they were used for storing things, right? For storing, seeds or beans or things like that. Yeah.
The one from Bridget. Hi, Hunter. Could you talk a bit more about the new trincheras tradition types? And could you tell us a little more about the plain ware manufacturing differences you identified in the different contexts at Paloparado?
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, I mean, so the pottery that I was primarily seeing from Paloparado in terms of diagnostic trincheras tradition, mostly falls within what I've classified as San Martin, purple on red, purple on brown, which is dominant for the local trincheras Atio phase, so between about 850 to 1050, which seems to be the bulk of when you're getting trincheras material culture at the site. You don't find much evidence of trinchera stuff really kind of later on during that. So the overlap at a lot of these houses with finding San Martin pottery with Nogales polychrome, also with like Rito red on brown, or Santa Cruz red on buff. That seems to be that time period in the 800-900s range. And it's also the time period in terms of design styles when trincheras designs kind of become most complicated. And that's also reflected in Tucson Basin and Phoenix Basin. So there's a lot of interaction and exchange that seems to be met there. In terms of the planeware, trincheras pottery is primarily produced coil and scrape. There's often very prominent scraping or wiping that you find on vessel interiors. You don't find with the locally produced stuff at Paloparado that really prominent scraping or wiping on the interiors. You do, however, clearly find vessels that have been smoothed out and then kind of often polished. And those sherds are often much thinner than paddle and anvil pottery. Paddle and anvil pottery in general kind of tends to be a lot thicker, whereas is the pottery that's coil and scrape locally produced tends to be a lot thinner and finer.
Could that be because the clay sources were limited, or?
Could be, and that's kind of why looking at I think temper sources and doing a petrographic study I think is really important, because that's an interesting question, right? I mean, are these different technologies the result of different clay sources? It's not readily apparent to me, kind of looking, with a microscope or kind of with my own eyes, but that doesn't mean that those subtle differences, aren't there.
I'm going to read this comment because it's one I agree with. One from Stephen. Kudos for an amazing amount of analysis and a month's effort. I agree, because I saw those boxes with the piles and piles.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Another question from Bridget. Did you get any textured wares?
No. There's a couple of unusual red wares that Di Peso classified as like cells red textured. I don't know what they are, but it's like 3 sherds. They could be, but they seem to be coming from classic period context. I'd be happy to share a picture. I did take a picture. They're very small, but in general, it's like no like incised textured plain wares or anything like that. No.
Joseph, would AI help reconstructions?
Different people have different thoughts about that. I'm kind of the school of thought that there's a lot of analysis is a pretty with reconstructions it could, right, with possibly it could with actually assigning to like certain types. I mean, types are the creation of ceramic analysts, right, and so kind of like there's a lot of subjectivity kind of with that as well. It could possibly aid in reconstructing vessels. That's an interesting possibility. I don't know. I know that there's been like AI technology that's being used for like profiling rims and things like that. But in terms of like putting vessels together, I still would imagine you probably need enough of it, right, to kind of make it a worthwhile process. But it's interesting. One of the things, I guess, just kind of adding to that's tricky with that too, is because all of this pottery is built by hand, right? It's not manufactured with a wheel. There's a lot of variability even within somewhat standardized forms. So I wonder how well that can be, or warpage or things like that. I wonder how much that could be. But AI seems to be kind of the new thing, so who knows?
Yeah. Well, another one from William. How were the various potteries fired?
Yeah, I mean, so these are all seem to be kind of open air fired pottery, which is kind of the main practice that you're finding. In terms of firing temperature, that's hopefully looking at kind of some of the sherds kind of in a little bit more detail we can get to. There seems to be some variability in firing temperature. My observation that the locally produced stuff is fired at lower temperatures than like Tucson Basin stuff, but that could be just, they're working with different clays that, they don't need it as much. But Tucson Basin pottery and Phoenix Basin pottery for sure tends to be a little bit more kind of crisp in terms of like when its edges, whereas some stuff when it's lower fired, it tends to be a little bit more crumbly. But yeah.
One from Christina. Do you know if any of these vessels were used as Uranus? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Urns?
URNAS.
I'm assuming that it would be that she's talking about like a funerary urn. And with that said, none of these are. There were cremation funerary vessels. To my knowledge, all of those have been from this site have been repatriated. So none of the ceramics that I was looking at were from funerary contexts.
And interesting one from Anne. Why use historic, prehistoric? Does this not imply history was only made according to non-Indigenous scholarship? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to use Precolonial. Di Peso was the one that I think, I mean, in general, I'm a proponent of using Precolonial. In talking about some of Di Peso's chronology, he definitely was the one that was interested in kind of like talking about the historic period and framing it as something that was different from the prehistoric. I think your comment is excellent, and I would agree with you. And if I did slip, I apologize. It's certainly not how I think. Pre-colonial is generally the term that I use.
Then one from your friend Elisa. Hi Hunter, thank you for your presentation. Are there worked perforated sherds?
Yeah, there's a few. And there was that example from House 47 of a Nogales polychrome work sherd. I'd have to look through all of the house context to see like what the frequency was. I did also look at examples of formal spindle whorls, malacates, like formal ones from the classic period houses. Those are only showing up during the classic period. But there's examples of those, and I did look at those as well from some of the unmixed houses.
That's the last of the questions, except there's one left in Spanish. I
Okay.
think it's, but I'm not sure.
Where is it? Is it like, can I see?
Yeah, if you go to the very last, second to last one from Nora. Starts with Felicita.
Oh, I know. I think she's just
Commenting.
Thanks for all this. Yeah, I know. We're good. Yeah.
I got the first word and that was about it.
Yeah. Cool.
Awesome. Well, that's it. And that's over our time. So I want to thank you, Hunter, for sharing your knowledge and also for continuing on Amerind's research. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful that the collections are there and they're in good hands and everything. And if anyone has the opportunity to look at them, they should, because there's wonderful stuff there for sure.
Yeah, and thank you everyone who joined us, and I will turn it to Hunter for his last comments. Oh. Thank you.
Well, yeah. Well, thanks everyone. Feel free to email me if you have other specific questions or comments. I'm happy to answer that way as well. Otherwise, thanks everyone.